Hi, I'm Nick Pregnance with DuramaxTuner.com. We're in the shop today with Joey Allison.
Howdy, guys.
We're going to be talking about some Allison 1000 stuff, common failures, kind of how they work, what they look like on the inside. Just get our feet wet a little bit. We were lucky enough to have DJ open the Allison behind us here. We got it laid out on the bench. If you look at the parts, it's just kind of, it's overwhelming. There's a lot going on.
A lot to an Allison.
I think it's important to know that this transmission is similar to other automatics in the way that it has multiple clutch packs, multiple gear sets. I mean, it shifts automatically. It has a torque converter. But it's different from previous model like 4L80 and the 47RE, and it doesn't have a band. So it's clutch-to-clutch shifting. It's all electronically controlled. There's no hydraulic control. It's got a serious brain to it.
It does.
And it's a beast. I mean, when put together right, these things take a real ass kick. And from the factory, they're a big improvement over the previous model 4L80, 4L85. I mean, it's a horse of a transmission.
The Allison is a beast of a transmission, but like anything in stock form, it's not invincible. I commonly get calls from guys pretty much every day asking why their Allison is going in limp mode, going in a 4th and 5th gear. So I wanted to ask why that happens.
Let's take a look at that stuff, man. I mean, let's see what fails, right? What you mentioned overdrive, so they're going into 5th gear. This is the situation, right?
Yep.
What do they say on the phone?
It's typically climbing a hill, they're getting on it. Passing guys on like 2-lane blacktop, that's when I get a lot. Guys are getting on it and truck goes in limp mode. They have to pull over, clear the code, restart.
Yeah. So when you say limp mode, tell them that like slam goes into 3rd or 4th gear.
Yeah.
Holds that gear, and all of a sudden it's like, they know something bad happened.
Yeah. Not a happy camper.
Okay. That limp mode is usually a slip in 5th gear. So there's 2 clutches applied in 5th gear, C3 and C2. Usually it's a C3 clutch pack that slips when the truck goes and makes that 4 or 5 upshift with the torque converter clutch lockup.
Okay.
And that's because we're losing line pressure, and we'll get into that in a minute, but we lose main line pressure on that 4 or 5 shift with lockup, and all of a sudden the truck does not have the holding capacity and the clutch pack slips, and the code you get is incorrect 5th gear ratio. So let's take a look at those clutches and show you which ones slip and why they slip. Let's get the fundamentals out of the way first.
Yep.
This is the pump. This controls the pressure in the transmission. So on the early Allisons, there's no pressure modulation whatsoever electronically. It's all mechanical. The first pressure modulation, like real pressure modulation, started in 2011. There was a G solenoid before that. Electronically bleeds off some pressure at low throttle positions. Not something you really need to be concerned about. It doesn't impact the limp mode.
Mm-hmm.
On this pump, you got two important features on the pump here that I want to draw your attention to. One is pressure control. So this valve and this spring control the main line pressure. And that main line pressure, combined with the number of clutches, the friction material, and the diameter of the clutches, defines the holding capacity.
Okay.
So more clutches, more holding capacity. More pressure, more holding capacity.
Makes sense.
Right? Stock mainline pressure without the converter clutch locked up is about 250 psi. Give or take, right? Strength of the pump, strength of the spring. Right. These trucks are 15 to 20 years old now, so...
Miles, wear and tear.
Miles, wear and tear, whatever, right? But we'll call it 250. TCC engages, and that pump has a kickdown valve right here, and what that kickdown valve is going to do is drop line pressure about 90 psi, again, give or take. But we're going to go down to about 160 psi line pressure.
Okay.
Okay, and that is because you only need that much line pressure in those gears with the TCC engaged per the factory calibrators to hold stock power, right? And the more line pressure that you run sustained, the more heat you make.
Yep.
That's the enemy, right? So heat lowers mileage and adds heat to the radiator stack, and takes away from the truck's ability to cool itself. All the bad reasons we don't want heat when we don't need it.
Yes.
So that kickdown valve, that's a problem in the aftermarket. Okay, because we want that line pressure, especially when we got this thing turned up to 400 or 500 horsepower and 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. We want that 250, 260 pounds of line pressure, or more than that if we're running a built transmission.
Right.
So when we go into 5th gear and we're all of a sudden at 160 psi of line pressure, that's a problem. Now there's 2 clutch packs applied in 5th gear. You got the C2 and the C3 pack. If you reach over there in the corner there and grab me the C2 pack. Now I'll just have you that one stuck to the bench?
It is. Trans fluids keep
That's
it.
all right. We'll let the viewers know there's one steel stuck to the bench. Hold up the C2 pack, okay, and you can count the number of frictions in there. So the frictions are the organic material.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Okay, and as we look through them, you can kind of see on this transmission, this is a used transmission, but the frictions look like they're in really good shape. There's no burning, there's no marks, there's no material.
Yeah, there's still part numbers on it.
Still part numbers. The coloration's really good. The steels don't have any burnt spots on them, just a little bit of wear, but that's a really nice looking pack.
Yeah.
Okay, you can set that one back down. Okay, so keep in mind that pack and the C3 is engaged. Now the C3 on this 5th gear upshift is coming off of a 3rd gear upshift. It was also engaged in 3rd gear and released.
Right.
And now C3 is going to reapply. Take a look at those clutches, count them for the listeners.
Got 1, 2, 3, and 4.
4.
Yep.
That's different than the number you counted before.
It sure is. And these look a lot different too.
Okay, so we got a high horsepower truck. We're down on line pressure by 90 psi, and we got 2 clutches trying to hold.
Yep.
Right? Which one's going to give up first?
The obviously the C3's here.
C3's
less
there.
clutch, less metals, just less material holding the power.
All right. What evidence do you have in front of you?
Well, you can see that the clutches here obviously got pretty hot. They're discolored. You can't see any part numbers at all.
Okay.
Yeah, they're pretty toasty.
Yeah, let's take a look at the steels. Is there any... I mean, this one isn't nearly as bad as some of them that we see. There's a little bit of marking on there, but
Yeah.
I mean, you can see a little bit of hot spot, right?
Yep.
I'm sure this truck probably drove fine. It might have limped once or twice, but
Right.
I don't think there's any major issue with the operation here. And that's kind of the thing we see when customers call in, is they get limp mode once,
Right.
they get limp mode again, and then after a while, you know, what that limp mode is saying is that this pack is slipping.
Yep.
And if this pack continues to slip under clamped force, you're going to degrade the clutches, right?
Yeah.
So you only get to limp so many times, you only get to slip so many times before
Right.
eventually these clutches are chewed up.
Yep.
And at that point, it's time to step up.
Right.
And the aftermarket has quite a few solutions for the C3 clutch pack.
Yeah.
In our DT550 and DT750 and 1000, we put a six clutch pack in here. We use a different clutch material as well.
Yeah.
But we're trying to get this C3 pack to hold
Right.
under that, you know, that 1,000, 1,400 foot-pounds, whatever you're running as a performance enthusiast.
Right. So it makes a lot of sense. Something I get is guys who have 06, 07 trucks, they don't run into this issue as much. I guess, why would that be?
Yeah. This situation was addressed in the 06, 07 trucks, so GM addressed this. So those trucks do have higher line pressure
Okay.
with the converter clutch locked. So you don't see that. You don't see those incorrect 5th gear ratio codes as much on those trucks, especially at reasonable power levels. What you do see on those trucks is converter clutch failure. And that's the call where you get no codes, but chattering
Yeah.
from the tunnel. So you can
Yes.
feel the converter clutch
Yeah.
kind of like
Yep.
doing
Yeah.
this.
Guys getting pushed through stop signs and having to really apply the brakes trying to come to a stop.
Sure. If it gets really... yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Because it starts with, I feel a little bit of chatter with my trailer behind me, and I'm pulling a load, and I'm really working the truck, and my trans temps are climbing much faster than they used
Yes.
to.
Yep.
Right? So you're getting slippage somewhere in the system it's not mitigated.
Right.
If you continue to beat the truck in that situation, eventually that converter clutch will fail altogether. And it might fail to the point where it drags. And
Right.
that's where you get pulled through stop signs. You get really an unpleasant driving situation.
Right.
I mean, as soon as you put the
Yeah.
truck in gear, it wants to lurch
Yes.
forward or kill the engine or whatever, right?
Yep.
And that's a bad situation. Usually the trans fluid's fried by then,
Right.
like just a done deal.
Okay, so we went over on what we need to address with the C3 clutch packs, on what to do to them to make them hold more power. Let's talk about the converters.
Yeah, that's the next thing to fail, right? So
Yeah.
we added more clutches to the C3 pack. We do similarly to the converters. So the single disc converter, good for 800 to 1,000 foot-pounds, depending on who's driving it, depending on what tire, depending on the turbocharger setup. Dual disc converter, good for 1,000 to 1,200 foot-pounds. Triple disc converter, like in our DT750, those things are nasty.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, the odds of you slipping a triple disc converter without being at the professional competitive level, pretty low. I mean,
Okay.
I've seen them hold 2,000 plus foot-pounds of torque. So usually something else in the transmission is going to need to be addressed, before you injure that converter.
What's the point of a billet stator? Well, what are those pretty much?
Yes, thank you. Good question. So we briefly touched on competition use, DT750, triple disc converter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the stator is going to define the stall speed. The stall speed is what I would call kind of the minimum useful operating range of the engine.
Okay.
The two are not interchangeable, but if you're thinking about it, it's a good way to think about it. So do I want to be operating the engine under load at speeds below this?
Gotcha.
So a stock turbocharger is going to come to life at 1600 RPM, and that stock converter is going to stall out at about 1800 RPM. And stall just means the engine won't be able to accelerate past that. It'll just run against the trans, right?
Okay.
Foot on the brake, foot on the gas. That's your stall speed.
Okay.
Okay. As you change the stators or go to a billet stator, you might pick a stator that allows the stall speed of the truck to be raised. So you might get 2200 RPM, 2500 RPM.
Right.
And all that allows the truck to do is operate in a higher rev range without the converter clutch locked to get the load moving. So to get on top of the turbocharger.
Right.
So you see guys with S400s or bigger turbochargers running higher stalls.
Okay.
And when you run those higher stalls, it's harder on the stator. The stator is part of the operating mechanism in the hydraulics of the converter. It's part of the coupling mechanism in the converter.
Okay.
That stator gets its ass kicked. Okay, so if you run those high stalls, you get a lot of difference between input shaft speed and engine speed. And that energy is going somewhere, and it's going into the stator.
Okay.
The stator's taking a lot of that abuse. The point of the billet stator is to not allow flex. So to maintain the same stall speed time and time again when you're on the line, stalling the truck up in four-wheel drive, getting ready to launch.
Okay.
So you get the consistency there, and you don't fail the converter in that scenario.
Makes sense.
You get guys with twin turbos, nitrous, whatever, stalling up on the line at 35, 40 pounds of boost.
Yep.
It's rowdy.
Yeah.
So that's the point of the billet stator.
Okay. Okay. Does that create more heat in the converter then?
Certainly running the truck like that creates a lot of heat in the converter, and it's hard on parts in general. But the billet stator is not going to create more heat or less heat than the cast stator. Just the stall speed is going to create more heat. So the higher the stall, the more heat in the transmission.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we're not going to set customers up, with stock turbochargers with goosenecks with high stall converters because it's just a lot of heat.
Right. Okay. Makes sense.
Not pleasant to drive or mileage, right?
Yep.
But if you're running that big turbocharger and you need that extra RPM because the truck's laggy, that's when a high stall converter really is nice to have.
Okay. We went over what we have to do to the clutch packs to beef them up. We went over what we have to do to the converters to make those strong. What else fails in the trans? The shafts, right?
The shafts are a big question we usually get from customers, right? Like as they're upgrading, they want to know, do I have to put billet shafts in? Do I not have to put billet shafts in? Specifically from the Dodge guys, right? Because they're used to putting billet shafts in everything.
Yep.
We don't usually upgrade to billet shafts until 1,000 horsepower. We might do it sooner if the truck is being used competitively or has big tires on it or is in a situation with a particularly abusive driver. Let's look at the shafts. Okay, so we got some big stuff here. This is the input shaft. This thing's a monster.
Yeah.
Failures on these, I would say they're pretty rare. Occasionally we get the snout broke off in the converter, and you'll see that after maybe having some tire hop, or a guy does a hellacious burnout and the thing hooks up at the end and snaps this off in the converter. But for the most part, fairly rare. Next will be the intermediate shaft. I would say these are the rarest failures. I don't think I've seen an intermediate shaft fail.
Okay.
And after that, you have the output shaft. So, beefy output shaft.
Yeah.
Rarely do I see output shafts fail. Most of the scenarios where they fail right there at the splines. And it's a guy doing a 35 or 40 PSI boosted launch in second gear at the drag strip with slicks.
Okay.
Or really spooling the thing up.
Yeah.
Letting it eat. You might see it in a similar situation sled pulling.
So
shell the output shaft.
Really where they're putting the power to the ground effectively.
Yeah, where they're really hooked up, putting the power to the ground and making it happen. Other hard parts that are worth looking at right here, you have the P2 planet and the C2 hub. On our DT1000s, we do upgrade these pieces, especially on trucks that are being used competitively, trucks that are running big tires, or trucks that are shifting through the gears under power a lot. So a sled puller might run third gear and fourth gear going down the track.
Right.
Not necessarily making a lot of shifts. right? Might make 1,200 horsepower, but doesn't shift a lot.
Yeah.
Might even run just one gear going down the track.
Right.
Drag racers are shifting through the gears every pass. And those guys, usually there's a situation where the trans isn't learned, or they're trying a new setup, or the truck was off power one pass and now it's on power and it's got to learn. And you get kind of a, what I call a messy shift, or you get a hard-hitting shift. And a lot of guys who own Allisons know what that feels like.
Yes. Yep.
If you get that on really high power levels, or maybe you might even see that on a no defuel shift, this interface will twist. So you'll have twisted splines right here, and you might see the same thing in here, or you might see this ballooned out. So what they do is mill out the face of this P2 planet and put a billet piece in its place, and then you're going to use a beefier casting on this C2 hub. But really, with those modifications, the pressure turned up, the shafts addressed, man, they're pretty nasty, even at 1,000 horsepower plus.
All good to know. I have a specific question. Had a customer call today. Okay. His Allison was failing on him, going into limp mode. He's worried about driving the truck here. When should he really be considering getting the truck towed in or trailered here, or what's okay to drive? Yeah,
no, good question. I would say for the most part, you can nurse those in, especially those fifth gear failures. A lot of the trucks have overdrive lockout. You can lock them in fourth gear and drive the truck here in fifth gear.
Okay.
If the truck is not pulling through the brakes, it's not making grinding noises, it's not like immobile, so you can probably nurse it here. Stuff you want to really look out for would be those things, right? If the converter is failed and the thing's pulling through the brakes, obviously don't drive it, have it towed.
Yeah.
If it's just the clutch packs failing, usually it's one clutch pack that's failed and the other ones are kind of on their way or thinking about it. If they can just avoid that gear or get past that shift and kind of nurse it the rest of the way, it's usually okay to drive. The material and debris is gonna circulate through the transmission from that one failed clutch, right?
Okay.
The risk is that debris and that material gets to the point where it fills the trans cooler, or destroys the converter, or gets hung up in the converter.
Right.
Right, because if we start tearing up multiple clutches, we get a lot of debris that's going through the transmission and the transmission cooler. And take note, guys who are rebuilding transmissions and putting new transmissions in trucks, if you're doing that, you need to check that trans cooler. You need to always flush that trans cooler. Because if you're not flushing that trans cooler, that debris and that stuff that you had in the transmission is going right back in your new transmission. Right? And we don't have any control over that.
Yes.
If we send you a transmission in a crate.
Right.
So just great practice, right? Always flush that trans cooler after a transmission failure. But I would say for the most part, as far as nursing a transmission to get it fixed, to a fault, even the Allison puts up with a lot of abuse before getting addressed. That was a great question. I mean, and obviously there's a lot more on the table here. I mean, we barely scratched the surface on the basics and fundamentals of Allison operation. There's a lot more we can talk about here.
Right. No, that's a lot of great information. That's what I need to know, be able to pass along to the customers. We're a knowledge-based company, and that's what we need to know to...
It's important to share that stuff, right?
Yes,
yeah. Well, hopefully you and your customers appreciate getting to see the inside of the transmission here laid out on the table and getting to talk about common failures and how to handle them. So, I appreciate you.
Thank you.
I'm Nick Pregnitz.
I'm Joey Allison.
This has been a Diesel Insights. Hope you enjoyed it.